Well, I think it was the first time I got hurt. It was pretty severe. I got a concussion. I knocked out my teeth. I woke up pretty much in the ambulance. Whoa. And my first thought was not, what have I done? This is crazy. It was like, well, how long do I have to stay off my skateboard? I mean, it was immediately like, how do I get back? And also I remembered, as I came to, I remembered what I had done and what mistake I had made. And I was thinking like, well, I'll never make that mistake again. That was really the thought process. And it wasn't a matter of mortality or fear. It was just more like, and I guess I realized at that moment, well, I realized it then, but I realized it later that I wasn't really afraid to get hurt for the sake of progression. I wanted to push through and learn from my mistakes and endure injury and pain to get to these goals. And so I think that a lot of friends that I had, they got hurt once and either they quit or their parents told them to quit.
What would you have done if your parents had told you to quit at that point?
It's a good question. I relied on them so heavily for transportation to the skate park and support in that sense. I probably would have tried to skate and make a go of it however I could, but I don't think I would have been successful at it because I had a lot of support from my dad. He was basically the chauffeur for all the skaters in our area to go to different parks around the Southern California area, and so if he weren't there, no other dad would have picked up that slack.
And so I big brothered for this kid for a while, and because I was into skating, he wanted to get into skating. So bought him a board, took him to the skate park, and he's like the target kid that you've been building the skate parks for, really underprivileged, grew up in Compton, and so it was a cool thing for him to do. And I took him to the skate park, had him in helmets, pads, like the whole nine. And we were there for maybe like 30 minutes and another kid fell and dislocated his wrist. And so his wrist was like this, but up and back.
Yep.
And I was like, oh, I was freaking out. And I thought the kid that I was with wasn't. And so he just kept doing stuff. But every time like he would go down a ramp or something, like my heart would jump. Now, as somebody who obviously has felt those impacts and you've broken your pelvis and concussions, what was it like for you watching Riley start skating for the first time? Did you struggle with the fear of him getting hurt in a way that you didn't with yourself?
I did, but I also saw early on that he had a good sense of his limitations. And he was very much like me in the sense that he wanted to push his boundaries, but also not risk his mortality. I mean, he definitely got hurt in ways that I didn't anticipate. He broke both elbows before he was like 10 years old.
Oof.
With full like elbow cast. And that was hard to endure, but I wasn't gonna discourage him. And also, he kept coming back to it.
Did you help him conceptualize dealing with pain and fear? Because I've seen him skate now as a pro skater, and as I feel with all pro street skaters especially, it just looks insanely painful. And so he's got some sort of relationship with fear and pain and all of that.
I think just more by example. We have 4 other teenage boys now, and they rely on me to sort of assess their injury or to take care of it because I've been through so many. And I think it's just more leading by example and showing that, well, I don't like to say get right back out there, but the sooner you get out moving and stuff, the faster it heals, really. Depending on the severity of the injury. But I think that that's key, and I'm a living example of that.
And do you have is there anything you say to yourself, a mantra or whatever, when you get hurt? Like, are you focused on what you're trying to accomplish?
Yes, it's different now that I'm older. I'm not trying to take the risks that I used to, obviously, and there are times when I just feel like my body's not in prime shape or capable of pushing this next limit, obviously. But sometimes the stubbornness overpowers that.
It's interesting though, you talk about that internal drive, you're doing it just for you. That really does seem to be the hallmark of how you've been able to have as much success. And I really do want to understand what is it about you that led you to just keep going, to innovate when the sport was dying, to face people making fun of you when it really seemed like it was over, but you just kept doing it?
Well, the thing that I loved initially about skateboarding is that it felt like it was this empty canvas. Anything you do, even if it's a little tweak, it was a new trick. And so it was like there's this constant progression, and all I ever wanted to do was to keep learning new tricks. I didn't really care about the standings or the perception of my style or whatever, as long as I could keep learning these new tricks. And so as I was successful in competition and winning a lot of the events, my drive was just to keep getting better. And a lot of times if you see an athlete or an artist or whatever that reaches a certain apex that they think like, this is the goal, I'm number one, this is it, they lose all their motivation because that's all they were trying to aspire to. And my motivation was always just to keep getting better at skating. And so, enduring sort of the naysayers was probably helpful. It seemed like I was getting bullied at the time, because I did. People like to write me off and say I'm a circus skater and whatever.
Because you were doing tricks.
Because I was doing tricks and I wasn't focused on the style. I just didn't have the body frame for the big gnarly airs and the flowy style. I was like this scrawny rat, and I just figured out a way that I could maneuver my board under my feet and in the air, and eventually got taller and stronger, and I could do it much higher in the air. But still, I was largely made fun of for my lack of style. But that only fueled the fire for me, because it was just like, well, I'm just going to keep doing this and hopefully prove them wrong in the end. And I can't say why me, except that I just never wanted to slow down.
And you got to think, like, I move at such a pace that even hearing so much of that stuff, I just forget. I forget about the depth of a lot of the things that I've done throughout the time, because I almost only have memory in like 3-year chunks at a time from doing so much different stuff. And when I hear about the idea of flipping cars and breaking world records, jumping cars backwards and getting attacked by sharks and tigers, it just makes me feel so warm inside, It's like a highlight reel, like nobody's highlight reel that can never be taken away. It's the joys of what something like Fantasy Factory allowed me to achieve, not only from a business and media standpoint, but really from these bizarre highlights of doing all this fun, exciting stuff.
So there's a couple things in there that I want to talk about. One, Danny Way, but we'll come back to that. And then two, that memory, right? So you're in the water, you just got attacked by the shark on purpose. Swim back up to the top in what I imagine is sort of an adrenaline rush, but you stop yourself, force yourself to really stop and take it in. Why do you do that? I
just knew at that point that I would never be diving, most likely ever again. I would never be around 50 sharks ever again. And it was just this moment of clarity that was just like, wow, whatever happens for the rest of your life, look at this. You just allowed an 8-foot shark to bite you and attack your arm, and it worked. You know what I mean? It's like, before I got in the water, it was like, this is so dumb. Like, why would I even want to do this? I'm gonna lose function over this arm for this television show. And at the time, they were saying they didn't like any of the cuts and weren't gonna air it, right? And so it was even that much more stressful of like, I'm going down to get attacked by a shark all for nothing, right? It was sort of the intent of it. And I think that moment of clarity just allowed me to soak in a moment that I didn't want to forget ever again. And I think from time to time on really, really big moments, I'm able to really settle down into the present so deeply that it becomes ingrained forever, right? Versus where I'm so used to being surface level, like moving at 100 miles an hour, achieving vision and goals, as opposed to settling into moments from time to time that are super important, i.e. having my first child. When I got married, I was able to just sink into it so deeply that every single moment of getting married is so vivid to me, and I think it's luck that I did it in certain times. Other times it was the type of moments that you don't ever want to forget, and you have to purposefully put yourself there in a deep level to remember it. Otherwise, you're just getting through it.
And do you say in those moments, like really just slow down, stop, look at it? Like how do you make sure that this is one you're gonna hold on to?
Yeah, I literally like stop myself and talk to myself. Like just there's, I would almost consider it a level of presence I think people probably find in meditation, right? Where you just ground, you get grounded much more, and I just purposefully ground myself with the intent of remembering it, which basically subconsciously like hits record almost, right? It's a different sort of level, and I just don't think you can do it without doing it purposefully,
So you and I share a sort of weird memory trait, which is I've always looked at it as I live in these 10-year chunks, and I have like this sort of 10-year phase that I remember pretty intensely, but even that it sort of dies off, so that the 10th year I remember a lot less than year number 1. And at first it really bothered me because I would forget a lot of cool shit. And then I realized this is actually really beneficial, because the things that I see other people hold on to, I don't hold on to them just because they dissipate so rapidly in my memory.
Yeah.
Do you cultivate the like, this is one I want to lose as much as you cultivate this is one I want to hold on to?
I don't think so, but I call my lack of memory the gift and the curse, right? It can come back and jam me up where I wish I would have retained certain things and turn them into habit, if you will. But God, it's a beautiful curse. I mean, I live without failure, you know what I mean? Like, I live without regret, without pain, without any of the stuff like behind of all the stuff that I went through. It bleeds away so easily for me, So I don't do it purposefully, and certain things may trigger more painful stuff as they're fresher, but eventually I don't remember any of it. But it also forces me now to stuff that I really want to retain, and especially turn to habit, which I think is probably the most difficult transition of experience, of how do you take something good or bad that you've experienced and then apply the lesson from it, and now in a consistent way. I think again, for that aspect, you have to like recognize it, identify it, and then begin to use it with intent, you know what I mean, in order to have it sink in.
Going back to the other thing I want to talk about from that, Danny Way. So for those that don't know, Danny Way's a skateboarder, amazing skateboarder, jumped the Great Wall of China, which you were there for. That was pretty crazy. That whole documentary was mind-blowing. Yeah. But you've talked really eloquently about the fact that like he doesn't have a fear, like ability to really recognize fear.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that, and then I want to hear how it, because to me, like the way you feel about Danny Way, I feel about you, just from a skateboarding shark attack perspective.
Yeah.
So
no, I was scared. You know what I mean? And it was like, I look at that as, look, here's the delineation between me and him, where I need to add up all of these things to fight through the fear, right? I need to have all these stakes connected to it. Like I was, getting attacked, launching my toy line in Walmart, doing a television program for Walmart, and launching this brand new season, brand new show to follow Robin Big, right? It was like the stakes and the calculation, and that's what drove me to that level, to be able to execute, and where I feel like he's just really doing it out of like the passion for the accomplishing it.
That's really interesting, and I'll be really interested to see how that plays out in other areas of his life, like if he's able to bring that play and innovation, so one thing that you've described as being somewhat unique to skateboarding, but it seems like you're doing as an entrepreneur, is skateboarding allows this progression, right? You learn one thing, it stacks. You learn the next, it stacks on that, until you're doing, crazy tricks like Danny. Do you see that as having correlates in entrepreneurism, and what is that notion of progression? Like how can people understand that and internalize it in their own life?
I believe progression is the key to happiness, right? It's that expansion of the universe and ultimate evolution, and when you equate it to skateboarding, you learn to ollie, you learn to kickflip, you learn to grind, you learn to kickflip to grind, right? Like you learn to kickflip the backside Smith, you learn to kickflip the backside Smith, the kickflip out, right? Like it's these levels, and you can only evolve and progress and become elite if you understand and learn the foundational steps along the way to put all of what you could consider experience together to do something really incredible. And I think a lot of people don't understand when it comes to entrepreneurialism, there's sort of these key elements that you have to understand from a foundational perspective in order to find success. Which is ultimately creating a brand, understanding how to operationalize it, and understanding the financial implications of how you do both those things, right? I think so many different times in the world of entrepreneurialism, especially this day and age, it's idea-driven, right? As opposed to the battles won or lost and how it's operationalized, and then ultimately the economics behind it. Right? I think that's one of the biggest things that's overlooked in space, especially this day and age. So many people having an idea that they think can be a successful business and wrapping some sort of service or need or disruption around that idea without clearly understanding how to evolve that